The flashing red and blue lights painted the cracked asphalt like a battlefield. My hands trembled, not from guilt, but from rage at how easily they'd twisted everything. The crowd whispered, their faces half lit by the pulsing glow. Some pitied me. Others enjoyed the spectacle, leaning in the way people do when they smell blood. And there she was, the villain of this story, smirking with arms crossed, as if the world had finally confirmed her superiority. She whispered to someone beside her, eyes never leaving me, like a hunter savoring the final moments before the trap snapped shut. For a moment, silence stretched long enough to suffocate me. The weight of humiliation pressed down, heavier than the flashing badges or the stares of strangers. But what she didn't know, what no one there could possibly predict, was that this was not my breaking point. It was my beginning. The narrator in my head whispered a single line as I lifted my eyes from the ground. They thought this would break me. But they had no idea what was coming. Before the flashing lights, before the crowd of strangers judged me with their eyes, my life was simple, predictable, not glamorous by any means, but steady, like the quiet hum of a refrigerator at night. I lived in a modest neighborhood lined with oak trees that dropped golden leaves in the fall and sticky pollen in the spring. Most of the houses looked the same, small porches, cracked driveways, mailboxes leaning slightly from years of use. The kind of place where everyone knew your business, whether you wanted them to or not. I worked long hours at the local hardware store, stacking shelves and helping customers pick out tools they barely understood. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the bills, kept food on the table, and let me save a little extra in the piggy bank I kept tucked away in my closet. It wasn't just coins in there, it was years of quiet sacrifices, loose change from skipped coffees, wrinkled bills from double shifts, every dollar representing discipline and hope. I wasn't the loud neighbor, the flashy one, or the gossip. I kept to myself, nodded politely, helped out where I could. That was me. The quiet one, the dependable one. And then there was her, Margaret. She lived 2 houses down, but her presence stretched across the whole block like smoke you couldn't quite breathe away. On the surface, she seemed perfect, always dressed in expensive clothes, her yard manicured like something from a catalog, her voice smooth and sugary when strangers passed by. But beneath that polished mask was control, power, a hunger to be the one everyone deferred to. She had this way of playing favorites. If you did what she wanted, if you bent to her will, you'd find yourself showered with her approval, invitations, compliments, even favors. But if you resisted, if you dared to draw a boundary, you became the villain in her story. I never asked for a fight with her. I wanted peace, but Margaret, she wanted power. It started small. At a neighborhood cookout, she made a point to pass the dessert tray around to everyone except me, then laughed as if she had simply forgotten. The people around chuckled nervously, trying not to get caught in the crossfire. I smiled politely, shrugged it off. But I felt the sting. The humiliation wasn't about cake. It was about sending a message. You don't belong unless I say you do. Later, she criticized the way I trimmed my hedges, said they looked sloppy compared to the others. Then she called a neighborhood meeting and suggested that everyone follow her yard care standard, as if she was the self-appointed queen of the block. Most neighbors went along, not because they cared, but because standing against her was too much trouble. The contrast between us couldn't have been sharper. I quietly gave more: time, money, effort. She took more, demanded more, always pushing her advantage like a chess player plotting 10 moves ahead. And yet, for all her petty games, I stayed silent. I thought ignoring her would keep me safe, but I should have known. Villains don't stop when you ignore them. They only sharpen their claws. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, I found my front gate locked. A heavy, unfamiliar padlock dangled from the latch. I stood there in confusion, groceries slipping in my arms. When I turned, Margaret was standing at her window, smirking. She lifted a teacup to her lips, staring directly at me as if to say, "What are you going to do about it?" It was petty, almost ridiculous, but it was also the first taste of something darker, a foreshadowing of the war to come. That night, as I sat on my bed staring at the piggy bank glinting faintly under the lamplight, I felt a chill I couldn't explain. Somewhere deep inside, I knew Margaret wasn't done. She was only just beginning. The padlock on my gate should have been the end of it. A childish prank, a neighborly spat blown out of proportion. But with Margaret, nothing ended where it began. She fed on escalation the way a fire feeds on oxygen. First came the whispers. I overheard them at the grocery store, in line at the post office, even while sweeping my porch. "Did you hear? He's behind on his bills. I heard his hours got cut." You know, some people just can't manage their lives. They said it quietly, but never quietly enough. I could trace the trail of those rumors like smoke back to its source. Margaret. She always wore the same innocent mask, shaking her head and pretending concern, as though she were reluctantly sharing the burden of my supposed failures. Neighbors who used to greet me now looked away. A few still nodded, but their eyes carried suspicion. Even at work, customers asked subtle questions that made my stomach drop. "You doing okay out there?" "Heard things are tough for you." I wasn't failing. I wasn't behind. But Margaret had planted a seed of doubt in everyone's mind, and I was powerless to stop it from growing. Nights became the worst. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun endlessly, its hum echoing the buzz in my skull. My heart pounded even when I was still, as though I were running a race I couldn't quit. Sleep slipped away, leaving me restless and hollow. By morning, my reflection in the mirror was gaunt, eyes ringed with shadows. Still, I resisted. I didn't retaliate. I told myself that if I stayed calm, if I ignored her, it would burn out on its own. But it didn't. Margaret doubled down. She began showing up at town meetings, bringing up my name in the most casual, venomous ways. "I just worry about his property lowering the value of the block. He seems unstable lately." Each word dripped with poison disguised as concern, and people listened. They always did. Even my own relatives, the few who lived nearby, began calling with subtle warnings. "Maybe you should just get along with her. Don't stir trouble." Their voices weren't cruel, just weary. They didn't want to be caught in the blast radius. The isolation grew heavier, pressing into my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. I began to wonder if she was right, if maybe I was the problem. Then, one night, something changed. It was late. The street was quiet except for the steady hum of a distant air conditioner. I was sitting on my porch steps, head in my hands, when a voice broke through the silence. "You know, she's done this before." I looked up. A man stood at the edge of the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. He wasn't a close neighbor, more of a passerby, someone I'd seen around but never spoken to. His face was lined, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes were steady. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. He stepped closer, his tone low, almost conspiratorial. "Margaret, she picks someone every few years, someone quiet, someone who won't fight back. She builds a story about them, poisons the neighborhood, and makes sure she's the hero who comes out on top." I stared at him, stunned. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone in this nightmare. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He gave a faint, tired smile. "Because the last guy she targeted moved away. And I still regret not speaking up. I don't want to watch that happen again." His words struck something inside me I hadn't felt in months. Hope. A flicker, fragile but alive. That was the first time someone reminded me I wasn't alone. The passerby's warning echoed in my head for days. It was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it proved I wasn't imagining things. Terrifying because it meant Margaret's cruelty was deliberate, calculated. And sure enough, she wasn't finished. One crisp autumn morning, I opened my door to find 2 police officers standing on my porch. Their presence was heavy, like storm clouds about to break. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as the red and blue lights flashed across the street. "Sir," one officer said flatly, "we received a complaint." My throat tightened. A complaint about what? He flipped through his notepad. Noise disturbances. Harassment. Trespassing accusations from a neighbor. His eyes flicked toward Margaret's house, where she stood at the window, phone still in her hand, feigning shock that officers had even shown up. It was surreal, like stepping into someone else's nightmare. Me? Harassment? Trespassing? I barely left my home except for work. I tried to explain, but the officers weren't interested in details. Their job was to document, to warn, to leave behind a trail of suspicion. When they finally left, Margaret stood on her porch, clutching her sweater against the breeze, her lips curled into that same smug smile. From that day forward, it wasn't just gossip. It was official. There were records now, complaints, reports, warnings, all with my name attached. Margaret had leveled up her game, and she knew exactly what she was doing. The pressure mounted. My boss called me into his office, concern etched on his face. "I've heard some things," he said carefully. "I know you're a good worker, but if these complaints keep piling up—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Even my relatives, those who once told me to just ignore her, now questioned me. "Why are the police getting called?" "Maybe you are too confrontational." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. Margaret had turned silence into guilt, neutrality into suspicion. I was cornered, or so she thought. One night, desperate for answers, I dug through my drawers and pulled out the manila folder I'd been quietly filling for months. Inside were dates, times, and notes of every strange incident: the padlock on my gate, the whispers at the grocery store, the yard meetings, the police showing up. Alongside it, I had something stronger: recordings. A small digital recorder, the kind you could buy for $20 at the hardware store, had been my companion since the first time Margaret tried to humiliate me in public. On it, I had her voice, sharp, venomous, undeniable, laughing about locking my gate, whispering lies about me, even coaching another neighbor on what to say if the police came asking. The piggy bank in my closet still held my savings, but this folder, this was my real treasure now. Proof. The next time Margaret filed a false complaint, I was ready. When the officers arrived, I didn't argue. I simply handed them copies of what I'd collected. They didn't say much, but I noticed their posture shift, their eyes soften. They left without a warning that time. Word must have reached Margaret quickly, because that evening she stormed out of her house and stood on her lawn, shouting across the street, "You think you're clever? You think anyone's going to believe your little stories?" Her mask cracked for the first time, rage flashing where sweetness used to hide. Neighbors peeked again, but this time their expressions were different. Not certain, not loyal, but curious. Doubt was creeping in. I should have felt victorious. But instead, Margaret did what cornered predators always do. She doubled down. If lies and police complaints weren't enough, she would reach deeper. She would drag me into meetings, courts, anywhere her influence could stretch. And as I watched her slam her front door, shaking with fury, I realized something chilling. She thought she still had control. She didn't. Margaret's fury didn't fade after that night. It multiplied. If the police and whispered rumors hadn't broken me, she would find other weapons. And she did. Soon, the lies spread farther than the neighborhood. Anonymous posts began appearing online, painting me as unstable, dangerous, a menace to the community. Every word was dripping with malice disguised as concern. Someone should check on him before he snaps. I heard he scared a kid once. He doesn't belong here. I didn't need to guess who wrote them. Margaret's words had a signature, sharp, rehearsed, dripping with superiority. But she wasn't content with the internet. She began recruiting. I noticed it at the next town meeting. People who used to nod politely at me now sat closer to her, whispering, nodding at her cues like puppets on strings. She had turned neighbors into soldiers, her flying monkeys, carrying her poison from door to door. Some believed her, others just didn't want to be her next target. And in the middle of it all, I stood alone. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. Inside, I was changing. I had spent too long reacting, hoping her storm would pass. But storms don't pass when you're their target. You have to build shelter. Or better yet, build weapons. So I became methodical, strategic. Every whisper I overheard, every lie she told, every meeting she twisted, I documented. I kept records in folders, on flash drives, even backed up to the cloud. My once simple manila folder grew into a stack of binders, each page a nail in the coffin of her lies. At night, when the anxiety clawed at me, I'd open the piggy bank. Inside, the coins and bills felt heavier than money. They felt like fuel, proof that I could endure, save, plan, that I wasn't powerless, and I wasn't entirely alone anymore. The passerby, his name was Daniel, began stopping by more often, sometimes with advice, sometimes just with quiet company. He told me stories of Margaret's past victims, the elderly widow who moved to another town, the young couple who sold their house at a loss just to get away. Each story ignited something fierce in me. I wouldn't be another casualty. Therapy became another weapon. I found a counselor who helped me untangle the knots Margaret had tied in my mind. The shame, the self-doubt, the guilt. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like the air itself was poisoned. Margaret, meanwhile, was unraveling. Her control was slipping, and she knew it. She began raising her voice more, her sweet mask cracking in public. People noticed. Some whispered. A few even dared to pull away from her orbit. But predators don't retreat when cornered. They lash out. She filed a petition with the Homeowners Association, demanding a formal hearing about me. She spread false reports to city officials, hinting that my property was unsafe, my behavior unstable. She even went so far as to stage an incident, placing broken glass on her driveway and accusing me of vandalism. Each move was desperate, but dangerous. And yet, with every attack, I grew sharper, stronger. I wasn't just documenting. I was building a case. I was no longer the quiet neighbor hoping for peace. I was preparing for war. One evening, as I slid another stack of printed emails into my binder, Daniel watched silently, then said, "She doesn't see it yet, but she's digging her own grave. All you have to do is be ready when she falls in." I closed the binder with a snap, feeling the weight of both the paper and the moment. The day of reckoning was coming, and no one could stop it. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. My binders sat stacked on the table like soldiers waiting for deployment, each one filled with the months of torment I had endured. The piggy bank gleamed beside them, its chipped ceramic surface catching the dim light. To anyone else, it was a trinket. To me, it was a reminder. Every sacrifice, every coin, every moment of restraint had led here. By morning, the community hall was packed. Rows of folding chairs scraped against the polished floor as neighbors filed in. The air buzzed with whispers and tension, heavy as storm clouds. At the front, the Homeowners Association board sat behind a long table, papers neatly stacked, pens poised. Margaret was already there, radiant in her carefully chosen outfit, a navy blazer, pearls at her throat, hair styled to perfection. She smiled as if she were attending a celebration, not a hearing. Her confidence was intoxicating to those who still believed her lies. She gave me a look across the room, smug and sharp, as if to say, "This is the end for you." The chairperson cleared his throat. "We are here today to address concerns raised by Mrs. Margaret." He shuffled his notes. Allegations of harassment, property neglect, and disturbances. The room grew silent. All eyes turned toward me. Margaret rose, her voice dripping with practiced concern. "I take no joy in being here, truly. But for the safety and peace of our neighborhood, I had no choice. This man has been disruptive, aggressive, and frankly dangerous." She listed her accusations, her voice trembling at just the right moments, her hands clutching her pearls. It was a performance, and she played it well. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others frowned, uncertain. When she finally sat, I stood. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from the weight of what was about to happen. I placed the first binder on the table, then another, and another. "I've listened quietly for months," I said, my voice steady. "I've endured the rumors, the false complaints, the lies. But today I won't stay silent." I opened the binder and slid a page across the table, an email Margaret had sent to another neighbor, mocking me, instructing them on what to say if questioned. Gasps rose from the crowd. Another page, photographs of the padlock on my gate, the broken glass she had planted on her driveway, timestamps aligning with her accusations. Then, the recording. Her voice filled the hall, cold and unmistakable. "He won't last here. We'll push him out, like the others. Just say you heard something, anything. They'll believe me." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Margaret's face drained of color. Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The mask she had worn so carefully, for so long, shattered in front of everyone. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. I straightened my shoulders, my voice calm and unwavering. "I don't want apologies. I don't want excuses. I want change. No one else should have to go through what I did." The board exchanged glances, whispers rising among the crowd. Some neighbors looked at me with wide eyes, others with shame, realizing how easily they had been swayed. Margaret's empire, built on lies and manipulation, was collapsing, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The board adjourned quickly after that. They didn't need hours of deliberation. Margaret's voice on that recording had spoken louder than any testimony ever could. Within minutes, they dismissed her complaints as baseless. Not only that, but they announced an investigation into her behavior. Margaret tried to protest, her voice rising into a shrill, desperate pitch. "You don't understand. He's dangerous. He's manipulating all of you." But the more she spoke, the clearer it became to everyone. The Queen had no crown. Her allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding her eyes altogether. The neighbors who once whispered her lies now whispered about her. The same storm she had stirred against me was now circling back around, pulling her into the center. When it was over, I walked out of the hall into the cool evening air. For the first time in months, my chest felt light, as though a weight I had carried alone had finally been lifted. Daniel clapped me on the shoulder, his expression equal parts relief and pride. "She won't recover from this," he said quietly. And he was right. In the days that followed, Margaret's presence shrank. Her once perfect lawn grew untended, her porch lights stayed off, and her windows closed tight. Neighbors stopped visiting. Invitations disappeared. Without her throne of influence, she was just another resident, one who avoided eye contact when passing on the street. As for me, life began to bloom again. I fixed the lock on my gate. Not the padlock she once hung there, but a new one of my choosing, strong and gleaming, a symbol of boundaries I would never let anyone break again. I framed the deed to my home and hung it on the wall above my desk. For years it had been just a paper, tucked away in a drawer. Now it was a declaration. This place was mine, and no one could take it from me. And the piggy bank, my old, chipped companion, sat proudly on the shelf, no longer hidden in the closet. I began filling it again, not just with spare change, but with crisp $2 bills I collected on purpose. Each one was a reminder that value isn't measured by someone else's opinion. It's measured by what you protect, what you build, and what you claim for yourself. Neighbors slowly began to see me differently. Some apologized for believing Margaret's lies, others showed their support quietly. A wave, a kind word, a plate of cookies left at my door. I didn't need their approval anymore, but the gestures warmed me. Work felt lighter, too. My boss, once wary, now trusted me more than ever. He'd heard what had happened, how I had stood my ground with calm strength. Most people would have cracked under that kind of pressure, he told me one morning. You didn't. And he was right. I hadn't cracked. I had changed. Margaret, for all her venom, had unintentionally given me something priceless, the chance to discover the strength I'd carried all along. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the neighborhood in gold, I stood on my porch and looked down the street. The same street where I once felt watched, judged, cornered. Now it felt different, open, free. I thought back to the beginning, the whispers, the humiliation, the flashing police lights. The memory still stung, but it no longer defined me. It was simply the opening scene of a story that ended in victory. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Have you ever faced favoritism, betrayal, or the abuse of power? Have you ever been made to feel small by someone who thrived on control? Someone who thought they could break you? I shared my story because I know I'm not the only one. Maybe your Margaret was a boss, a neighbor, or even a family member. Maybe they spread lies, played favorites, or tried to silence you. If you've ever stood against that kind of cruelty, or if you're still finding the courage to, share your story in the comments. This is a place where voices matter, where silence no longer wins. And remember this: worth isn't something they give you. It's something you claim for yourself.